Hi, can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good morning. I'm Claire Gardner. I'm from the University of Derby and I'm based in the Centre for Excellence for Learning and Teaching. I'm a senior learning technologist, so I have functional responsibility for our digital learning systems. And this presentation today is just going to take the form of a bit of a story. It's got a focus on our background, our use of technology to support accessibility. I am going to focus on Ally, which has been touched upon in some of the previous presentations. And I'm also going to examine what's driving the change at Derby, which is largely around the educational model, our culture, and also the legislation that's been referred to in a lot of the presentations today. So if I focus on, let me just shift the screen along. So some of the background to what we've been doing, and it actually goes back some years. So we started a few years ago with our learning and teaching strategy. So at the heart of what we do, inclusive is mentioned. So our learning and teaching strategy references an inclusive and flexible learning provision. And that's also a theme through a lot of our other strategies like assessment and feedback and our technology enhanced learning strategy too. Again, to consider where our journey, it's around, actually it goes back to some of the changes with the disabled students allowance right back in 2016. We set up a project called Inclusive Derby, and the initial remit was to look at how to respond to those changes, but it quickly developed a wider remit to consider inclusive practice across the university. Some of the core outputs were around sort of sharing lecture notes in advance, using lecture capture to record appropriate teaching sessions, looking at good practice when creating documents, presentations and videos to make them more accessible. Around that time, we also developed another project looking at a digital practice programme baseline, and that was where we were going out and benchmarking practice to support enhancements to the student digital learning experience. And a core theme in that baseline framework was around accessibility and inclusive approaches. So you may be sat there going, Claire, why is this relevant? Well, at the time we didn't really have the tools or technologies to support any of this. So this actually became our rationale for a business case, and we started to invest in some of the technology. So Blackboard Ally was very significant for us. We purchased this alongside another piece of software called ReadSpeaker to improve the accessibility of our virtual learning environment, which is Blackboard. For those of you who don't know, just quickly, Blackboard Ally integrates with any VLE and it provides the alternative formats for the students, the instructional help for staff, and then also institutional reporting. We went live in 2018, and I think 3 years is absolutely flown by because I was revisiting some of these slides that I've used in other presentations, and updating them has been really interesting. So when we went live back in January, so it was 3 years ago, it gives you a notional score, and this just shows some of our impact and progress at a very good but trackable level. So we started out at 41% and we progressed to 48% by the end of the academic year. And I must say with some of this data that Ally's changed over the years we've been using it. So it's changed the way it reports, it's brought in WYSIWYG, so it has impacted some of the scores. Again, I did this presentation similarly for a conference at the start of the pandemic in March. We have the University of Derby Online who take a very different approach to content authoring. They have dedicated teams. So a year ago, their score was at 96%, and our on-campus, so we've been able to break that down to look at our online versus our on-campus, and that tracked at 69%. And then currently, we're now at 75%, and you've just shown some of the breakdowns and the scale of content that were there. Our University of Derby Online track at a similar rate. So this is providing a snapshot of where we're going, and we can see growth and improvement through this. So it's been a useful tool, and we can see those changes coming across the system. So beyond Ally, so Ally is a really cool tool, but also there's other things that are in play. So when we developed and rolled out Ally, we also then started to look at how we integrate that message with our other tools. So for example, we look at using the Microsoft Office suite, and we firmly embed some of the messages around the accessibility checker. So it's not just Ally that we're focusing on. We reinforce those messages through things like a simple 3-step process that we set down with the academics. That was around, at the point of creating that content, using Office and the accessibility checkers, then uploading it into the VLE where you've got that a second engagement point through Blackboard Ally, and it gives you that bit of a loop to capture some of that, because some of the feedback initially was when it was going into Ally, it was almost a bit too late to remediate that content. Lecture capture was at the core, and now that's shifted within the pandemic. So a year ago I was talking about Panopto, and now we're meaning Blackboard Collaborate and Microsoft Teams recordings. So this is all part of our inclusive approach. We've been embedded software within the VLE, so I mentioned Read Speaker. We've also done a lot of work around focusing on inclusive approaches to all our learning technology infrastructure. So that includes specific guidance on being inclusive in Blackboard Collaborate, and then right the way through to resources like Box of Broadcasts, for example. So what's been the change and drive for some of what we've been doing? So the first one around is actually our educational model. So like most of you on the call today, throughout the pandemic and for the start of the 2021 academic year, the university took a new approach with a new educational model, which was how we deliver our blended learning approach in this new academic year. So with time on campus for our students, as well as that off-campus digital learning delivery. Underpinning that, we have a set of off-campus digital learning baselines, and these are the expectations to design to support our blended approach to teaching and learning, and to ensure our capability to deliver that off-campus digital learning. One of those baselines is specifically focused on making sure we're delivering accessible content, so we're trying to embed it at the heart of all our messages. In order to support staff at the beginning of the academic year, we developed an in-house blended course that was delivered to all staff. It comprised of 5 hours of learning, including a 1-hour synchronous session, and it was called the Off-Campus Digital Learning course, and we got 95% of our academic staff through that. So it was an all but a mandatory training approach, and that's been really core in pushing out those messages about inclusive practice to our academics. Following that, we've just also purchased a third-party course called Accessibility Me from AbilityNet. We recognise that as a team we talk a lot about the technologies and how we can use those, whereas some of our background, we were missing gaps around looking at it from the lens of specific disabilities. So we've just purchased this online course to support staff in thinking around, well, if we've got a visually impaired student, what sort of approaches can we adopt? So that's just been rolled out.
2 minutes left, Claire.
Thank you. And then finally, as everybody else has touched on to part, again, the other side of that is the legislation has driven our change. So that's looked at everything. Again, we've looked at accessibility statements. So I think we're nearly 3/4 of the way through, 77 of those completed so far. It's had an impact on everything right the way through to accessible templates in meetings, so the committee papers are now being delivered, so that change is really shifting across the university. I think it's important to say that culture, the university culture, has been a real driving force, but now also that legal requirement has also helped. The horizon, so what's next for us? We still get the questions, so we had a bit of a project looking at some of the practical side of the legislation. I still get asked when will it be completed, because somebody wants to tick it off their to-do list. So that's a real shift in culture that we need to approach. We've got a new learning and teaching strategy about to be launched, so we're looking at embedding inclusion right at the heart of that. And our next step is that we're planning on working with AbilityNet on their institution or digital accessibility maturity model to sort of start benchmarking and evidencing our progress and looking at our next steps. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. That's it from me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for sharing what you guys are doing. I think that it's really, really nice to be able to have other institutions sharing their practice as well, so everyone can learn from it, can take from it. So thank you very much. Nick, do we have any questions for Claire?
Yes, we do. So Craig has asked, I don't know how well you'll be able to answer this, but I'll ask anyway. How well do you think the Blackboard Ally scores reflect actual accessibility?
I think Blackboard's it's one part of it. It's not everything. It's not the be all and end all. It's beyond Ally. I've heard that, you know, in the talks today. It is a good tool to get people started and to teach all our academic staff the basics. I've learned so much from implementing it myself. The stuff I didn't know. You look at Matt's presentation about contrast issues. It doesn't look at that. It covers a core amount, and I think it provides a launching board on which people start to discover. So, you know, captions isn't part of that, but we've definitely got a lot of conversation about captions at the universities. So it's a core tool, but it's just one thing in that whole suite to help.
Cool, thank you. H has asked, what happens if somebody does not make their resources accessible?
We don't police it. We're looking at the stats from a top-down level. We have a benchmarking, so we're trying to encourage staff to look at their own course levels at that base point. But, you know, we're just reinforcing those messages. You know, we've got experiences like Paul's earlier recorded, and we share that as part of our training. Some of our students have shared their experiences, and just having that in front of staff can be quite a powerful motivation.
Cool. I have a follow-up question along those lines. You say you had 95, I think it was 95% engagement on your course, your blended course.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of tips or tricks on sort of how you got people to get so engaged in that?
It was a very top-down heavy approach. That was.
Okay.
It wasn't a mandated course, but there wasn't much. It was strongly encouraged for people to participate, and we were following numbers and reporting back those numbers on quite a regular basis.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. There is one final one here quickly. Anonymous has asked, they've said they've had issues with automated captioning software where academics with non-English accents have received inaccurate captions or captions in other languages. How would you say to decide where the workload should be put, sort of like, you know, once the tools have been provided, whose responsibility do you feel it should be to correct any additional problems these create or highlight?
So I think, like most institutions, that's not one that we've cracked at the moment. So we have messages in our statements and guidance for students that we tell them that it's automated, and that if they've got any issues with that automated transcript, the first person to contact is their lecturer in the first instance. That's as far as we're at the moment with that. It's a really challenging area around ownership. We will provide, you know, send them off to be manually captioned if that's also a requirement. But like most others in the sector, we're still scratching our heads around how to fulfil some of those requirements. But as people have said, we hope with our messaging that's, you know, that supports our students in the first instance.
Cool, that's great. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.